Yes, farmers. Creating good crops and healthy animals for us to survive. Without them working every day, the world would slowly die. And yet, they are considered the minority. Person with disabilities, or PWD, people with physical, mental, intellectual, and sensory impairments that hinders them from everyday life. A billion people, and yet they're considered the minority. We are the Homebodies, or Homebuds for short, and in this video, we are going to have a social analysis of both farmers and PWDs, and why they are the minority. Farmers, one of the important sectors. They produce various types of food for us, and without them, everyone would be starving to death. Aside from the general knowledge of planting dates, breeding cycles, and harvesting periods, a farmer often needs a good working knowledge of mechanics in order to keep their equipment running and in optimal order. But why are they still in the minority? Unfortunately, they have a tragic record in history. In 1950 to 2004, there were a total of 95 fatalities of the Filipino farmers' struggle for land, food, and justice. They are just one of many instances where the government perpetrated violence against farmers. In January 2016, due to the drought caused by the El Nino weather phenomenon, more than 20,000 farmers resulted in hunger and poverty in Maguindanao alone. Mindanao farmers then conducted a peaceful protest but was met with violence which resulted in 3 farmers dead, 87 missing, 116 hurt, and 18 hospitalized. The support of the policies is not enough to help the farmers. We'll be talking about 2. The first one is the Comprehensive Agrarian Land Reform Program, or CARP 1988, and no, this is not related to the fish. This was created to end the long-standing Spanish labor system that placed unfair land ownership into the hands of the wealthy. It has been 30 years since the implementation of CARP, and yet the government still struggles to implement the land reform it has promised. Due to this, farmers leasing land have a higher technical inefficiencies. The farmers contribute to 1/5 or 20% of the economy's aggregate domestic output and accounts for 2/5 of the Philippine workforce, but the service sector accounts for nearly half the output and jobs in the economy. The second policy is the Rice Tarification Law, or Republic Act number 11203. This policy states that it will remove the government limits, called the quantity restrictions, on rice importation, allowing traders to bring in unlimited volumes of rice at any time. This promised a more competitive and fair market with increased aid, but farmers have yet to feel the support of the law. With a low tariff of 35%, farmers had no choice but to sell rice for as low as 7 pesos a kilo. As corporations dominated huge commercial outlets, farmers remained poor due to bad policies implemented by the government with a lack of effective and sustainable policies for farmers. As previously mentioned, with the implementation of CARP 1988, average farm beneficiaries own only 1.5 hectares of land that is unable to make them a profit. Agricultural workers have the lowest daily wage compared to those in the industry and service sectors, despite farmers comprising 33% of the country's workforce. Furthermore, farmers are drowning in debt because of the inefficiency of the Masaga 99. Due to this predicament, farmers are characterized as poor and is an occupation that does not seem to command influence between the classes. Further showing the struggles of the farmers are the setbacks the female farmers have been experiencing. Philippine agriculture has been predominantly male-oriented, with women having been given lower priority to social and economic opportunities. The agricultural labor force is still mainly composed of men at 77%, while only 23% of employed workers under agriculture are women. Wage disparity persisted among women primarily because they were employed under mediocre paying jobs. Average wage rate from 2013 to 2016 indicated that male farmers were paid $0.30 more than women farmers. Women farmers have poor recognition with limited extension services targeted for women. Other than the farmers being one of the minority, another is one we are all familiar about, the PWD. According to the Department of Health, persons with disabilities, or PWDs, includes those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, and sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. According to the WHO, an estimate over 1 billion people, or 15% of the population, has some form of disability. They are considered the largest minority. These numbers continue to increase through population growth, medical advances, and aging processes. Just like the farmers, they are victims of history. The Greek Empire
Kaire ke de, Alexandros eimi, hyos ton anakton kai ekonos ton theon.
was obsessed with human perfection. They believed that beauty and intelligence were intertwined, so they tried to rationalize that disabilities cannot be taught. In the Roman Empire,
Te saluto. Augustus sum imperator et pontifex maximus Romae.
they considered PWDs as the inferior group and believed that having a disability is a mark of God's wrath. Additionally, children with disabilities were considered property of the state, and it was mandatory for the disabled child to be abandoned. However, when the empire fell, people began to feel pity for the disabled and treated them with compassion. But this only lasted for a short while. In between the Middle Ages until the 1800s, people believed that they were considered evil and that it was a work of the devil as punishment of sin. They were left homeless and began beggars, whereas others were mistreated in medical institutions, resulting some to their deaths. The worst of it was probably during the 1930s, where Hitler used the minorities for his experiments, known as the master race. Those with physical deformities, and in particular those with mental disabilities, were subject to brutal experimentation and used as human guinea pigs. Connected with history a bit, the families back then were just as harsh as with society. Fathers were given the option to let their disabled children live or die. Pretty horrific, right? However, the reason for doing this is because of the time when survival is the most important thing to value. So they assumed that having them is a burden. But as decades went by, the families decided not to kill them but instead hid them as they considered them as a shame. This idea pushed through the Middle Ages until the 1800s. PWDs are getting as much as the needed treatment that they need, in that government continues to implement policies and all kinds of support and assistance to further enable them. This is the most prominent with the implementation of the Magna Carta for persons with disabilities, where PWDs are granted the rights the same of those able-bodied persons. The same law ensures that private sectors are incentivized when they employ PWDs as regular employees, apprentices, and etc. They are entitled to a 20% discount on the following: hotel accommodations, restaurants, recreational centers, and travel fares. What's even more exciting is that this extends to medical-related matters, with the medical-related purchases being exempted from the value-added tax. Despite the efforts given by the government to enable our PWDs, the class still struggles as they continue to face unemployment and discriminations. As reported by the US State Department, the policies that should help the PWDs are not effectively enforced and seem to be given no priority. This is evident with how the majority of the public buildings still remain inaccessible to persons with physical disabilities, and many schools still had barriers that limited PWDs from participating. It's also evident as only 10% of the employable persons with disabilities could find an occupation that suited their capabilities. Even up to now, as a DSWD's emergency subsidy program even proved that to have a barrier in giving PWDs their fair share of help amidst the pandemic. There is also a higher prevalence of disability among women compared to that among men. According to the World Report, the prevalence of male disability worldwide is 12%, whereas the prevalence of female disability is 19.2%. Violence against women is also experienced by disabled women. In such instances, disability clearly appears as a factor that exacerbates violence against women. The research literature reflects that gender and disability are usually studied separately, yet analyzing the intersection of gender and disability is an important initiative, given that they constitute two of the most severe forms of marginalization, injustice, and exclusion. So knowing these, what can we do to help them? Simple. Understand their circumstances and try to help them in any way you can without offending the other party. Let's help the farmers by buying our local rices and become more considerate to those with disabilities. The world is becoming progressive and we should continue to that progress. Thank you for listening and hope everyone has a great day.